Hello and welcome. The next 2 days are the biggest 2 days for the Indian economy, and we all wait with anticipation. Are we going to lose lots of money? Are we going to make a little money? Or we have no clue? It's a little tougher this year because economics anyway is very tough. It's full of uncertainty, and now you've got the uncertainty of economics coupled with the uncertainty of epidemiology, the COVID pandemic. The combination will make even a very sophisticated Bengali mind go into a tiz. Now, we've got a fantastic, a lot of intelligent minds, and I really hope to learn a lot from them because I still find the current situation very, very difficult to forecast and to look ahead. And let's start, let's not just look at India, let's look at globally. And we've got Junaid Ahmed, who is the country director for the World Bank and has experience from around the world. He goes back and forth from here to various countries, including Washington, in the middle of the pandemic. So obviously you're a brave man. But tell us, from all the countries you've seen, everybody is facing a similar kind of problem, right? The pandemic, the uncertainty. What are the key worries that most countries have and that India should have also right now?
Prannoy, first of all, greetings from Dhaka. So I'm across the border
great.
now. Prannoy, it's a very good namaskar. A very important question you have raised. And I think there are three things that I would focus on. One is the whole area of social protection, because dealing with the pandemic has made every country in the world, every government in the world slow down the economy because they thought they could flatten the pandemic curve. And to, if you will, bridge people, you had to give social protection. And the nature of social protection, who does it go to? It's not only about households and individuals, it's also about preserving small and medium enterprise. I think that's the first story. The second story is unfortunately even deeper, which is what we call the learning loss. Not only are students out of school, 1.6 billion students, but it's not only what they're not learning, but what they're the foregone learning, if you will. So the base with which they come back is a much smaller base in terms of learning for the future. And if you just build on that, you'll continue to lose for the future. So it's a huge learning loss that has to be dealt with, in addition to just simply bringing back the students into school. And then third part, which for me is extremely
learning
important.
Loss. So it's a lot of relearning, learning loss. That's a very important.
Not only a lot of relearning.
Yeah.
Prannoy, what we're seeing is that 20 to 24% of the students will not come back to school unless you actively go out and bring them back. And in particular, girls. A lot of families are holding
and this
them
you're
back.
seeing, and this you're seeing all over the world, is it?
This we're seeing all over the world. You're seeing it in Latin America, you're seeing it in Africa, but you're seeing it particularly in South Asia. So not only do you have to get ready for the teaching, but you have to figure out how to bring back the students to the school. And I think India here, because of its frontline workers, the Anganwadi, the ASHA workers, the self-help groups, this frontline becomes extremely important in bringing back the students into the school. But I worry also for another
And the third point you said,
the third point is really related to health. I think we're all fed up with this virus chasing us. It's time we chase the virus. We need a global class surveillance system, and South Asia needs a regional surveillance system where we can actively go after the disease, anticipate the disease, get early action, if you will, protocols involved. And it's very important because of the One Health issue. Animals are crossing borders, not only humans. And so you have to deal with the health from both the animal health side as well as the human side. And this whole idea of creating a regional surveillance of labs which send information to each other, community surveillance, genomic surveillance. That, I think, is an extremely important future investment to make.
Yes, very good point. I think Kiran Mazumdar has been saying that for some time. I'll just come to you, Kiran, because today's economic survey has got some very interesting things. It is a very good survey, actually, and in many places, lovely to see it being honest. But I'll just go into one or two factors and then ask Ila Patnaik about the economy and Onkar as well. But first, let's look at what the GDP situation is. It is a bit worrying, and it doesn't quite make it as plain as it should. This is what it looks like. It looks something like this. If we look at the graphic of the GDP growth, actually, we're still recovering. In fact, compared to 2019, we went down 8% and we've gone up 8.5. That doesn't mean we've gone up over. It's a low base. We're just below what we were in 2019. And for more than that, the normal growth of, say, 6% per year means that we have more than a 12% shortfall compared to normal times. So that's worrying. Perhaps the worst part about it is manufacturing. That has really suffered. If you look at the same figures from the economic survey on manufacturing, this is what it looks like. Actually, what has happened is manufacturing, not disinvestment, manufacturing. We can go on to the manufacturing, we'll come to disinvestment in a minute. I have it here. Manufacturing, here we are. It's the worst affected. 2019 level, if we look at that, it first dropped by a little bit, about 2%, and then it dropped even further. If we can just animate that graphic, please. Down 7.2, and then it went up 12.5, which seemed a lot, but it's from a low base. So again, we're just a bit above what we were in 2019, about 1% or 2% above 2019. The normal growth would be, over these three time periods, would be about 8%, so 24% or 23% shortfall compared to normal growth. And that really does affect the economy. So one should, now this perhaps no government can do anything about, but it is a big crisis to deal with. And we shouldn't think, 12.5, we are fine. We are 24% behind schedule. And if we look at agriculture, actually agriculture is not done too badly. It's kind of carried on regardless of the pandemic. Agricultural growth, 4.3, 3.6, 3.9. You really can't say there's any real shortfall compared to normal times. So Ila, if I can just ask you, is this now, how does one react to this? Because we are so far behind, manufacturing 23% behind what we could be, GDP maybe not that much, but quite a lot behind what we should be. What should a government do?
I think, Prannoy, as Junaid was saying, this is something that governments are grappling with in their attempt to reduce the spread of infection. Before we had vaccines, we got all these lockdowns and across the world, and that was almost the only way in which to try and reduce the spread of COVID-19. But, apart from manufacturing, services, particularly contact-intensive services like travel, tourism, restaurants, parlors, they've suffered even more because all these lockdowns plus the fear factor of COVID has actually got people not interacting, not going out. And really the only way forward is vaccines, testing, and hoping that we don't get another wave, and that even if we do, like the present one, it's mild and not something that requires shutdowns. Because really, it's very unfortunate what the world has had to face. And it's been a huge challenge for policy, for fiscal and monetary policy. So when you ask me what is it that the government can do, I think apart from vaccinations.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry. One of the worries was actually, and you know
I
this
think
well,
that,
even before the pandemic, sorry, there's a bit of a delay. Even before the pandemic, we were seeing a slowdown in the economy from 7% down to 4%. How do we reverse? I mean, we got to get lessons from that when we get out of the pandemic. We cannot allow that kind of slowdown to continue. Why did that happen, and how do we reverse it?
So I think the major reason for the slowdown was the capex slowdown that we've been seeing, since 11-12 actually. That had not picked up, and that was just continuing. And that really is about the policy framework. So you need financial sector reforms, you need bond market reforms, you need tax reforms, you need reforms in capital controls, and getting that whole ecosystem to work to get investment up, to get business confidence up. That's big.
Ela, that sounds like what the cricket commentators say. If you bowl well, bat well, and if you feel well, you may win the match. I mean, if you do all those things together, we should do better. But I think we need to think of how to focus, and I'll come back to what to focus on. Mahesh Vyas, I just admire the work that you're doing. It's just amazing, and you've been on for years. And you've been highlighting the kind of unemployment that was being generated before, and of course exacerbated during this pandemic. How do we get more employment now? I know you've written about it. We can hear it from you, from the horse's mouth, as they say.
Well, to get more employment, we require more investments. We require more investments by large companies that produce good quality employment. So if you just get employment in farms or in MSMEs, that's no good, because the quality of employment is bad, labor doesn't benefit much, and labor productivity, capital productivity, all is poor there. So what we require is to spur investments by large enterprises. Formalization of the economy that is seen needs to be strengthened a lot more, but we require to spur investments at a much faster pace by large enterprises. And I don't see that happening very easily, because household incomes are depressed, employment is low. Unemployment is not the problem. The problem is lack of employment. So I think the solution...
If I can bring in... it is very worrying. I'll just come back to you. I want to bring in Kiran Mazumdar, because you just mentioned quality employment and, a kind of a new look at how to increase employment. Kiran, there is quite a lot in this budget about research and development, innovation. We've seen unicorns. And if anything, that is quality employment, right? Is that our future? Look at our youngsters, and they'll take us forward.
So let's look at this very holistically, Pranay, because I think what my previous speakers have said, or panelists have said, is very important. To begin with, I think we need to look at what needs to be done to go beyond the 2019 performance. And as everyone has said, we had started slowing down. So now it's not only catch up, but it's also about now spurting ahead. Now, although the economic survey does say that we will continue to be the fastest growing economy, that's not enough as far as India is concerned, because we do have to double our per capita income for sure. And in order to basically get the economy going, we also need to basically put more disposable income in the hands of people, because you need to create that demand which is lagging. It is showing up very, very starkly today because of the pandemic. And you just heard both Junaid and Ela saying that there is a huge economic strain in terms of purchasing power of people.
Right.
And so I think you do need to focus on, looking at, the taxation on certain income groups. You need to think about, as Ela very rightly said, you need to look at the bond market, you need to look at many other fiscal measures because you cannot do
And
things
I
as
think-
business as usual. But coming to your question
Kiran,
on
I think-
R&D,
Kiran, very quickly, just let me interrupt you for a second. They both also stressed vaccines, preparedness, go after the virus, don't let it just come and hit you. How do we do that? We need to be a little more proactive on that, right? To, do better testing, genome sequencing, all that. We're a bit slow on that. How do we
well,
improve that?
I just feel,
You would know
yeah,
that
I
best.
just feel, yeah. So Pranay, my view has always been that we are doing a lot, but we are not doing enough. For instance, I think that
Right.
this pandemic has shown us that we can actually do things in a very smart way. The whole vaccination deployment has been digitized, which I think is amazing. And, at the scale at which it has been done, we have a huge amount of data. We're sitting on huge amounts of data when it comes to testing. I understand that there's been a lot of genomic sequencing and we're sitting on that data as well. But we're not really connecting the dots and analyzing this data to give us any more insights into how safe we are. And Junaid is absolutely right. We need a very strong surveillance, metrics. We need to basically have a sensible approach to how we're opening up the economy. I really think it's time we opened up the economy because we should feel that vaccines have kept us safe.
Right.
And I,
Well,
for one, really believe
Kiran, I just wanted
that
to-
vaccine.
Yeah.
No,
Sorry, I just
clearly
wanted to
believe
go
that
into one aspect about opening up. I just
Yeah.
wanted to go into one aspect that you're mentioning about opening up, and that is disinvestment. And we just saw Air India, after how many years, 40 years or more, going back to the Tatas, and it was a welcome sight. But it was a bit of a flash in the pan. Just look at the investment data in today's disinvestment data in today's economic survey. This is what it looks like. The target in last year's budget, if we bring up this graphic, was 1.75 lakh crores. That was the target in the budget last year. 1.75 actually, that 1.95 is 75. And what did we actually achieve? And this is the targets of the last few years. What have we achieved in actual practice? Just look at that. The actual is just going down, down, down. And this year, we are about 0.14 lakh crores. We're 92% shortfall compared to the target. And we've been short of target, forget this government, every single government. Onkar, can I ask you, why are we failing on disinvestment? Do our governments not believe in it? Is it just an administrative issue? What is the reason? I mean, 92% shortfall is shocking.
It's really shocking, Prannoy, and it's been shocking not just for the NDA government. It has been poor in the UPA government. As you said, out of 1,75,000 crore target, as of now, I think it is 9,330 crore, maybe 10,000 crores, so it's about 7% of the target. And it is shocking. And
Actually,
the answer is
they haven't included Air India.
when
Air
you
India
fail-
cash is about another 2,500.
but
2,500. That's a small
2,500.
point.
So it's about 8%.
Yeah.
8%. Yeah. So
that's right. Yeah.
if you fail the way we have failed time and time and time again, there are only two things one can say. One is that the government, whichever the government is, including this one, speaks big about disinvestment but does not actually do it. So let me give you an example of this one. It spoke of so many disinvestments. They haven't been able to do LIC. They wanted to do BPCL. They haven't done it. There are so many other disinvestments that have not happened. Now they are going to town about Air India, right? Now, the second is, why is it failing? The reason is, and I'm being blunt about it, actually nobody in government, especially within the civil service, wants it. Let me ask you a question, Prannoy, and this is a question also for Kiran. If your target of achieving something was 100, and in the year you ended up with 8 or 9 instead of 100, will the guy who have that target have the job? They won't. So let me ask you, why is it that the Secretary of the Department of Investment and Public Asset Management, Deepam, why does he continue? Answer this question bluntly. No one ever has put the real, straightforward, hard task on this department. Nobody does. Why does nobody do it? Because nobody in government actually wants privatization or disinvestment. And I'm afraid
that's the key point. Yeah, that's the key point. There's no belief in it, and the system doesn't want it. If I can ask,
there's no belief in it,
Chakravarti,
Prannoy. There's no belief in it at all.
You know, if we managed 1.75
there's a lot of talk about it, but there's no
crores,
belief.
I mean, just trying to get Somiron Chakravarti in here.
1.75 lakh crore.
One second.
10,000
Omkar.
crore. Yeah.
One second, Omkar. I just
Yeah.
want to get Somiron Chakravarti into this, and just to ask him, if we did that 1.75 lakh crores and we spent it on infrastructure, or boosting the economy, it would not affect our budget deficit that much, and it could make a big difference. So disinvestment, or dare I use the word privatization, could make a huge difference to our growth, right?
Absolutely, Prannoy. If you think of our budget constraints, our tax to GDP never crosses 12% of GDP, and 80% of our expenditure is on pre-committed items of salaries, pension, interest payment, defense subsidies, and grants to states. So the flexibility in the budget is only on that 20% of expenditure, and on items like divestment, where you can actually have a substantial windfall if you can do it. So the whole flexibility of the budget essentially boils down to how much one can achieve on divestment. But I must also add that the picture for this year is not as gloomy as you are painting it out to be. Today we have announced Nilachal.
Am I painting it? I'm just quoting the economic survey. I ain't painting nothing. It's just the economic survey
what
data.
I'm simply saying is that
anyway, carry on.
Today the government has done a Nilachal Ispat divestment, which is about 12,000 crores more. So we are already at 22,000 for the full year, and hopefully we are able to push through the LIC.
Compared to 1,75,000. Anyway, I think there's a point here that perhaps neither this nor earlier governments believe in it. And I just want to get back to Junaid about a problem that probably India faces like the rest of the world. And it's a big dilemma that all governments are facing in the middle of this crisis or this pandemic. The big dilemma, if we can just have a look at it, let's be a little simplistic about it, and let's show the graphic about the dilemma that people are talking about, and they're calling it what should the government budget deficit be? Should it be large, then it will cause rising prices, or should it boost growth? That's the kind of trade-off that economists around the world are talking about. If you inflation is a worry even today in India. The last 6 months, the wholesale price index has been rising by 12%. There's some things in the survey, and that maybe this is an overestimate, but we always used to look, because there are, I think, almost 400 items in the WPI. So 12% is a worry. So if budget deficit goes too much, inflation will rise, and that's really bad for politics. And if you look at the other side, boosting growth, that's also a worry, because the budget deficit's already pretty high at 6.8%. You go above that, you're pushing it. You'll go back to the 9% that happened in the middle of the pandemic when the GDP really fell. So is this a dilemma being faced, Junaid, by countries all over the world? And we've seen America now tightening, we're seeing interest rates going up. So that, there's this post-pandemic fear of inflation, and at the same time, you've got to boost growth. So this trade-off is tough, right?
The trade-off is tough, but what makes this shock, this global shock, very different from the ones we had in 2008 that it's not just a demand shock, but it's really driven as a supply shock. So any type of fiscal measures that are used for expansion has to address the supply side. So if the supply side is not dealt with, then it's going to be very difficult to maintain the inflation impact. And that's why the storyline of what are you doing in terms of education, what are you doing in terms of health, what are you doing in terms of logistics, the investment there, I think, is really the key issue. So putting it simply as budget deficit versus inflation, I think is a false dilemma. I think we have to look at where the state's expenditure is going and does it address the supply shock. If it addresses the supply shock, then I think we're dealing with the inflation story quite high. And we have to remember, this was not a demand shock. The demand shock emerges because you get a slowdown of the economy, you get people who are brought out of the jobs market. And that's why the social protection side was extremely important. So my answer to you is really, do we analyze, if we're going to analyze the budget, do we analyze it from the perspective of what is it doing to the supply side?
Right. Very good point, actually. Sajid Chenoy, this whole, how do we get out of this? With this fear, I mean, this fear of inflation, you know, it's across the world. America's tightening, everybody's tightening now because everybody did the right thing, boost the economy in the pandemic. But now, inflation is a worry across the world. How do you get out of this?
No, there are no easy tasks here. You know, as you rightly point out, the intellectual consensus 12 months ago was very clear. Everyone should spend, deficits would be large, and central banks would buy bonds to make sure that interest rates don't go up. Now, 12 months later, with the Federal Reserve clearly behind the curve, expected to raise rates 5 times this year, oil prices at $90 a barrel, which for countries like India is a negative terms of trade shock, it impinges on policy space. I think what we'll have to recognize was 2021 was the year of policy reinforcement, where fiscal and monetary policy could work together. 2022 may well have to be the year where fiscal and monetary policy become substitutes. I think the received wisdom around the world has changed, that in a pandemic-like situation, fiscal policy is far more efficacious in addressing uneven recoveries. So I have been arguing that fiscal policy should still remain supportive. I think the most important near-term imperative for government is to spend on public investment, on physical infrastructure, on health and education. And that process has begun. We saw, 21% growth in infrastructure spending last fiscal. April to December, we got the data this evening, it's 26%. We need more of this for many more years. So I think fiscal policy need to remain supportive. We should get consolidation, but modest consolidation, 0.5% or so. But precisely because inflation is elevated and inflation expectations have risen around the world and in India, monetary policy may be more constrained. So I think what we'll expect to see this year is a budget that still focuses on growth, on public investment. The consolidation is more gradual, but the RBI will have fewer degrees in freedom in buying bonds and preventing some hardening of interest rates in India, which we've already begun to see over the last
In fact, Mahesh Vyas has tackled this, in fact. And I'll go to Dorab as well, who's very silent for the first time in his life ever. Dorab, please ask questions, because don't ask me the question. Ask,
You
intelligent
talked about
people the
industry,
question.
but you haven't talked about service. That's the largest sector in the economy, 55% of GDP, and it's 1% below 1920. So it's much worse than industry. Much worse than industry.
Right.
Talk
Good
of
point.
employment.
Good point.
There is so little coverage of employment. If private consumption expenditure has actually fallen by 2.5% over the last 2 years, there is no consumption. So where is the demand? So unless, somehow employment is created, finally, everything lies with employment. But we have no data. Our periodic labor survey is 1 year out of date for urban India, is 2 years out of date for rest of India. The annual industrial survey.
But Mahesh Vyas has got all the employment data if you want.
Unless you have data,
Vyas,
you can't take decisions. You won't take decisions based on data. There just is no data to take decisions.
Right.
Ask Mr. Vyas. Please ask Mr. Vyas what he thinks of the data.
Mr. Vyas, I just wanted to carry on that from what Dorab is saying. This fear of inflation, and it's politically very, very, very important, is perhaps the most damaging thing politically, rightly or wrongly. Is that fear important enough or valid enough to be fiscally conservative when you're also not growing that fast?
I think it's important to look at livelihoods. It's important to see employment falling. And Mr. Dorab, we have a lot of data on employment, and we have been saying this every month, every week, that we have an employment crisis in the country. This is real-time data, and it can be deployed to say what is the trade-off we have between high inflation or high unemployment. Take unemployment into the equation, that we have got high inflation coming up now, but we had an employment crisis earlier. So if we don't do a fiscal push to repair this problem and be willing to bear a little high inflation for some time, it could just get much worse. So addressing employment problem through some fiscal push, which can lead to private investments, is probably the best way out.
If I go to Ela, Ela, you're the best to give us a perspective on the trade-off between employment, growth, and inflation. Is it a very hard trade-off, or as Junaid said, it's overemphasized? Even in America, are they overemphasizing this trade-off?
I think actually this trade-off is worse than even what Junaid has emphasized. Not just is it bad, but at this time, particularly when there's so much liquidity, almost every country has done accommodative, easy monetary policy, and in this year, they are going to have to pull back. Whether it is because of concerns about inflation in the US or here. But once that starts happening, you are likely to see a lot of volatility in money markets, in forex markets. So, think something like when there was a taper tantrum. Of course, this time we are better prepared. So, we know that it won't be a shock to us that the Fed will start withdrawing liquidity or raising rates. But I think the kind of volatility that we might see in financial markets, combined with the trade-offs, the earlier questions of what is the trade-off between inflation and unemployment, combined with that, this new feature that we are going to see, apart from the huge uncertainty due to the pandemic. I think that's going to make it much worse, and the challenge is going to be much worse. So not that the situation is necessarily going to be worse, but certainly it's going to be a very, very difficult challenge, because you're constantly going to have to figure out what to do with a view to trying to stabilize your exchange rate, trying to stabilize prices, trying to make the economy grow. And none of the standard textbook economics that we have learnt is likely to be very helpful.
You've got to learn textbook epidemiology as well. Onkar, this trade-off, tell us a little about it, because I know that this is an area you work on a lot. How, for example, America tightening up, the interest rates, the stock market is falling, interest rates are going up. How is that also going to impact India? We saw our stock market fall. Today it went up, perhaps in anticipation of a good budget.
That's fairly obvious.
The overall trade-off.
Today's, I guess, the anticipation of the budget. Today's was just the anticipation of the budget. But, it's very straightforward. If the Fed hikes interest rates, as Mr. Powell has given pretty strong indications that he will, probably around March.
4 times this year.
And everyone is going to wait for that March to happen. Yeah. So when the Fed hikes the interest rates, not if, the Fed will hike the interest rates. Once that happens, you are going to have 2 sets of problems. One is the rate at which inflows of foreign investments, not investment, but foreign capital inflows, the rate at which it was happening in India will slow down because all other things being equal, the US bond market will be better off. Second is the Indian interest rates will also have to go up. So, but that is something we could
That's
still
a worry.
deal with. I mean, unless it, I would worry about it, but we could deal with it. What we can't deal with, Prannoy, is a very simple thing, which is that we are running an economy. You know, we are saying many things we need to do. We need to spend money here. We need to do things on health. We need to give people employment. We're doing all these things. But, you know, let me just share the very simple point. In 2017-18, the centre's tax, this is from the economic survey, the tax to GDP ratio was 10.7% for the central government. That has come down to 9.9%, between 9.7 and 9.9%. ELA will tell you that this would shock the Finance Commission, because ideally we should be looking at 15 to 16% as the tax to GDP ratio.
It should be going up rather than down.
Steadily
Yeah.
Not, yes, we are, in spite of GST being good, our tax to and GDP not growing that far, our tax to GDP ratio is very, very low. And we are wanting to spend more for all the right and humane reasons. But hey, where is this going to come out from? And who is going to pay for it? And I want to say one thing before I close, is believe me, 2 years from now, in 2024, you are not going to have a tight budget because that's election year. And the year before that, which is 2023, which is next year, you're also not going to have a tight budget because that's coming close to the election year. So where are we going to do some basic correction? And I can't
By
see.
the way, this year is also
I
a
just cannot
semi-final
see it.
election year.
Simple as that.
UP is huge. Can I?
Yeah, it's a semi-final.
Yeah.
So
Can I just,
next year is another semi-final. So you know, where
there are
is
a lot
this
of
correction?
semi-finals.
I'm not even talking of serious correction.
Yeah.
I'm talking of some corrections
Yeah.
to take place. And no
Right.
one is talking of correction.
Yeah, very tough.
Everyone is talking about expenditure.
Right, right. Let me bring in Vishesh Chandiuk. Vishesh, one thing we haven't touched upon, and I think Mahesh Vyas's data and a lot of what ELA has been talking about also, is the kind of growth and of incomes we're seeing is a kind of K-shaped. In other words, the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. Now that is just an unacceptable situation, because the poor suffer the most in a pandemic. You know, we saw the migrant labor, we've seen medium MSMEs really suffering, and you know, we've been talking about barber shops and, you know, small businesses really suffering. And then you have this and the rich get richer. How do we tackle that K-shaped curve?
Absolutely, Prannoy. I think everybody recognizes that K-shaped recovery. I know there are a lot of economists on here who may have a different perspective, but I think eventually, what do we mean by that K-shaped, and what are we trying to change? It's that bottom half of the K, which we're trying to point up so that we are in a firm V-shaped recovery, right? That's what we'd like to see. And how can you prime that to happen? And I think...
and you actually want the inverse of a K-shape. You want the poorer to get... their income should grow faster than the rich, who can
and therefore,
manage a pandemic, but the poor just cannot. Yeah,
and therefore the question to be asked, I think some of the other panelists were touching on that, who's been impacted? You touched on that, right? It's the MSMEs, it's the high-touch industries, retail, aerospace, hotels, etc. It's the bottom of the pyramid, right? If you look at the data, my understanding is that MSMEs now, with the expanded definition, contribute almost as much as agriculture does to our economy. Right? The contribution from MSMEs with the expanded definition versus the contribution from agriculture is about the same. But at the same time, if you look at the budgetary allocation to MSMEs, is at least 10 times smaller. Is there an opportunity there to change that focus in the future?
Interesting.
I think the question that's being asked is, will vaccination, will just the gradual opening up of the economy be sufficient, or does more need to be done to prime that economy, to turn that K-shape back into that firm V?
Right. If Dorab is still there, Dorab, any thoughts about the K-shape? We've seen it all over the world, that the rich have got through this pandemic fairly well, but the poor have really, really suffered. And in a low-income country, the poor, I mean, it's life or death for them. It's really a crisis. Yeah.
The Oxfam survey shows that incomes of 85% of Indians declined. It says that 4.5 million
Right.
Indians fell into extreme poverty, which is 50% of all the people in the world who fell into. We have a population around 20% of the world. 50% of all the people who fell into extreme poverty were in India. So, I think last time the chief economic advisor did say that he expected a V-shaped recovery. That really was a hope too far, because we really were in a sharp
Right.
cave,
Kiran,
a sharp cave moving down.
Kiran, how do you look at this? Kiran Mazumdar, how do you, I mean, this is probably one of the biggest tragedies of a pandemic, of this pandemic and perhaps any, but this is the worst we've had, that the poor are suffering terribly. And, then we try and boost their income, then we talk about inflation. So are they the kind of scapegoat for everybody? How does that change? How do we change that?
So it's very obvious, Pranay, we have to really focus on this part of our, economy and this strata of society. So I, for one, believe that this is the time to really look at that, can we look at a real minimum basic income for those 4.5 million people who have been plunged into poverty, right? Like what Durab just mentioned. The second thing I think is we have some answers. We've been discussing it on this panel. One is the divestment has to happen because we have to invest in our economy. And without that divestment or privatization or whatever you want to call it, you cannot move ahead.
Right.
Secondly, I think you also need to understand that we need to look at many of these fiscal reforms. We are doing it too slowly. And I know that, at least in our sector, we are seeing a huge strain in terms of investing for expansion. There is demand, but I think we still need to see a greater fiscal incentive for many parts of our industry, both in R&D, because I really believe R&D is one of those areas that was touched upon in the economic survey, which really talked about the fact that we are so underinvested in R&D that we really can't even look at non-linear growth.
Kiran, I just want to ask you something about R&D and vaccines. And I have to say this, I've said this before, that I think Adar Poonewala saved this country by taking a risk and ordering things well in advance. And now he has a vaccine, again, not his own, but he's got the ability to produce a vaccine which is best for a booster dose. And it's recognized by the European Union, it's recognized by many people in Asia, WHO, and we are not allowing it. Why is that? I just cannot fathom it.
So, Pranay, first and foremost, we have to open up the economy and we have to take courage and confidence in the fact that vaccines are preventing severe disease. And with that premise, I think we have to get the MSME sector to start opening up. The services sectors have to open up because that has been badly impacted by the pandemic. The other part is, you're right, we need to open up the market to booster doses, to vaccinations. For God's sake, let's privatize it. Why are we still controlling and deciding who gets vaccinated and who's not? Because we have now vaccine adequacy. We did that when we were in a phase of vaccine inadequacy. We are long past that. And I think we've also suffered by preventing exports. So I think you need to open up export of vaccines. You need to open up vaccinations and booster doses to the private market. And I really think unless you do that, you will not see the economic recovery the way we want to see it. Because the moment you still impose control and command,
I want to stay on this for a second. Yeah. I want to stay on this vaccine point. Chano, if I can bring you in. We have the knowledge, we have the entrepreneurship, we have everything. And we had a target of 100% adults to be vaccinated by 31st December. What actually happened? 62% were. That's a 38% shortfall in vaccination. And that's carrying on every day today. We're not going to hit 100% till May, maybe June, by which time many people who got it a year ago will need another vaccine.
In all fairness, Prannoy,
Sorry,
I think we've done tremendously well in terms of vaccine deployment.
Well, here it is. Look, we had a target of 100% and we've done 62. And that target, the spread is continuing. And I don't see how we can say that's well when there are days when we don't even meet a basic target. And as you said, it's controlled, it's not allowed to be free. And there's so many other vaccines which are available, but we're not allowing it. So I just wanted to ask Sajid Chinoy, how important is this, that we get our vaccines up from 6 million a day to 10 million a day, 12 million a day, if we're ever going to beat this whole system?
No, it's crucial because, as you hinted, this is endemic. It's not that it's a one and done. We're going to need boosters every year, every 6 to 12 months. So we need a continuous supply chain of vaccines to make sure we never fall behind. But I want to step back and ask another question you asked about jobs. I think one has to recognize that the trade-off in India is very different from that in the US. But first, the reason that jobs are a problem all around the world is what the pandemic has done is essentially moved activity from the informal sector to the formal sector. Now, what that does is it means the capital labor ratio increases in an economy. You can produce the same output by using fewer labors. And so it's no wonder that India's output is back to pre-pandemic levels, but our employment to population ratio isn't. So the first task will have to be, how do you create jobs for the bottom of the pyramid? Let's be clear, who's lost their job? And that's why construction is so important, right? You need those infrastructure jobs because those are the blue collar jobs at the bottom of the pyramid that don't have income certainty and therefore aren't spending. The second point is there will soon be a skills mismatch because what you're already seeing in the industry is the formal sector has expanded, but the kind of worker that the formal sector needs to grow is unavailable right now. So there are two issues with employment. One is mopping up those that lost their jobs in the informal sector. And the second is a skill mismatch for the jobs that will be very quickly needed in a larger growing formal sector.
Let's go to Shamiran Chakravarti. You haven't spoken much about the K-shaped recovery and how we crack this and how this is a double whammy. You need epidemiology, you need vaccines, and you need economics. Which one are you? A combination of both or?
So, Prannoy, in my view, what is going on in the economy is that there is a virtuous cycle going on in the formal sector, and there is a vicious cycle going on in the informal sector. So what I mean is that if you think of the formal sector, people are still hanging on to their jobs. In most cases, they are hanging on to their income. In some cases, they have got a boost from asset prices. So their consumption level actually has continued quite well. And the companies which cater to this formal sector, they are doing fantastic. Their profitability is increasing. So, and you also invest in those companies coming from that formal sector. So that virtuous cycle is probably affecting 250 to 300 million people of this country quite well. Whereas the rest, about 1 billion plus population, which is there in the other side, there it's just walking in the reverse order. So if I'm a hopeful optimist, I would probably think that the formal sector at some point of time will pull up the informal sector. And maybe the approach that the government has taken is that we don't do too much of stimulus because willy-nilly the stimulus goes not so much into the informal sector, but goes to the formal sector, and hope for the best that with little bit of support to the informal sector in the form of social safety nets, it's good enough for us to see through this crisis period. But my suspicion, and I completely agree with Sajid on this, is that we need a massive boost in informal jobs through construction. I've been writing about it that about 1% of GDP we can
Just wanted to go
devote
back
towards
to
the social housing scheme.
Vishesh for a minute. Sorry, we had lost your audio. It was cracking a bit. Could you carry on? The important point you were making just before it started getting muffled.
Yeah, so the point Prannoy was making was that if we spend about 1% of GDP on building social housing, this is an experiment which a lot of emerging countries have done quite well. We are right now spending
just
about
wanted to go to
0.2%
Vishesh for a
of
second.
GDP.
Yeah. Just wanted to interrupt and go
Thanks,
to
Prannoy.
Vishesh
I think the point I was trying to make was still on the subject of vaccines. I think we have done a remarkable job. You touched on it. I think Mrs. Majumdar touched on it. Also, my kids are vaccinated, but I really feel the question that ought to be asked is, does our vaccine focus have to shift towards first vaccinating our kids now? The pandemic is probably an endemic. I'm not a doctor, but I can tell you how it's playing up on the minds of people who have kids who are still not vaccinated is in a very different way. We've got to get our schools opened. We're probably the only country in the world, only major economy where schooling is largely still from home. That does not work, and it's only going to further increase that disparity. That in that K-shape that we've been talking about. So I really feel on vaccines, our focus ought to be to give the first dose, the second dose to our children before we start thinking about booster doses for everybody else, considering how mild this new variant is. Just going back separately on some of the other things we were discussing,
right, I just
what
wanted to...
should be done. There are three things that drive economic growth, right? There's exports, there's investment, and there's consumption. And therefore, what will we see on those three things? Exports, just like last time, I think the focus will probably be on...
I just want to, sorry to interrupt again. We're just running out of time. I just wanted a quick summary of 30 seconds from each of you. Omkar, if we can start with you, or Ela, whoever prefers, just a quick summary of what you see in this economic survey and any signals for the budget and the future of our economy. Ela, why don't you start?
I see.
Shall I?
Okay, start with Ela.
Okay.
Okay, so I think that there are three important things that come out from this survey and the discussion for the budget tomorrow. The first is that there has to be an even bigger focus on vaccines and perhaps opening them up to the market and allowing everybody to go get a vaccine and not decide who it will be. Second, that there should be targeted programs putting money through whatever infrastructure, the JAM infrastructure or Jan Dhan accounts directly to the poor, and that transfer has to be there because of the huge increase in poverty. And I think the third is that the emphasis on public investment in infrastructure and various reforms that are needed along with it should be emphasized even more, because you need to increase the pace of job growth in the formal sector and the improvement in productivity. So that would be my takeaway and implication for tomorrow's budget.
Sorry to interrupt again. We're just running out of time. Quick last 30 seconds from Omkar and then Kiran Mazumdar-Shaw, and then we have to wrap. Omkar.
A quick 30 seconds is this, that as far as tomorrow's budget is concerned, from what, I'm not going to relate it to the economic survey at all. As far as the economic survey has been very well written actually. But as far as tomorrow's budget is concerned, the finance minister, not unlike other finance ministers, will try and take care of everything and accommodate everything, and in the process actually accommodate very little. And at the end of the day, when the fiscal year comes to an end of the next fiscal year, the expenditure will be cut back, things will be exactly the same as before, lots of large measures will be talked about, but I don't see any fundamental difference. I'm sorry, I'm not being cynical, but I've just seen far too many budgets that overpromise and dramatically underdeliver.
last few words from Kiran, because she's the only one around here who's both an economist and and knows her medical and epidemiology too. So whatever you say, Kiran, is correct.
Well, that's a very tall order. But having said that, I would just say believe in the vaccines and open up the economy. I would say you've got to focus on investing in infrastructure, as everyone has talked about. And I would like to see the start of a social net for the people who have been thrown into poverty. I think Ela said a lot of what I wanted to say. So I would just say open up the economy. We need to get jobs back. Employment will happen in the services sector, which has been, absolutely put into disarray. And that's what I would like to see, the jobs coming back to the services sector and to the MSMEs. So,
right, Kiran Mazumdar, I've always said you're right, and I go with what you're saying. I wish we had more time for Mahesh Vyas, because I really enjoyed the comments you made, but we've completely run out of time, and only time will tell, as they say, of what's going to happen. Thank you all very much for a most interesting discussion. I learned a lot. I hope everybody else did. Thank you for being with us. Welcome back. Now, it really gives me great pleasure to introduce you to a person who I'm immensely proud of. We used to know each other at the Delhi School of Economics, and now he's India's absolutely finest agricultural economist, Professor Ashok Gulati. Professor Gulati, from being a young kid at Delhi School, you really have done well. God bless you. And since you're a way junior to me, I expect a lot of respect.
Well, Pranay, you still have some hair, good crop on your head. It has disappeared in my case.
No. God bless you. Okay, Ashok, we really want to focus on key issues in agriculture for both the economic survey and the budget coming up. And the first thing I'd like to talk about, which we have discussed in the past, and that is, and I even mentioned this very strongly to Kerry when he came over from America in an interview. I said, look, please understand, Indian agriculture is different. We are dependent on the monsoon, we are dependent on rainfall, it's extremely volatile. Our farmers actually produce under great risk. They don't know what's going to happen, whether they're going to get a full output, they're going to get their income. It's a terribly difficult life, producing under uncertainty. And the most optimistic estimate that 50% of our agricultural land is irrigated. Irrigation is the one thing that stabilizes farmers' income. Shouldn't that be what budgets focus on? Irrigation, irrigation, irrigation.
Pranay, to tell you very frankly, after the two successive droughts that the Modi government faced when they entered the union government in 2014, 2014-15 and 15-16 were two successive droughts. Now that has happened only 3 times in the last 100 years, So they were literally driven to a very tight situation. And we at that time did discuss all these things, and we said what you are having is a policy of subsidies and doles and not as much investment in agriculture. And as you rightly said, irrigation is the prime candidate for that investment. So we did discuss, and Arun Jaitley at the time was the FM, and after a lot of discussions, 99 projects were shortlisted to be completed within the next 4 or 5 years, and 40,000 crores were allocated right away after that. Progress has not been as good as we had expected, but I would still say that the direction and the focus is very much on that. And today, as you rightly said, almost half of India's agriculture is irrigated. And in Punjab, almost 99% is irrigated, so.
Right. I must say that that's really great to hear that your focus has been on irrigation. Of course, implementation has to happen. And I guess you and I will not relax until 85% of Indian agriculture is irrigated, because that is causing a lot of hardship. The other
Let me
big problem,
say,
sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
One little thing, just increasing
Yeah.
irrigation cover is not sufficient, because we are utilizing water in a very inefficient manner. So we must learn
Yeah,
how to
true.
get maximum out of every drop of water. And groundwater,
Exactly, yeah.
60% we are dependent on groundwater for irrigation, and that is depleting,
Yeah.
especially in the northwest, like anything. So we need to learn, our cropping patterns need to be right, and how to use irrigation rather than just flood irrigation.
Absolutely right, exactly. Must learn to use that water carefully and with sustainability. The other big problem which really troubles me, and I'm sure troubles you, is that we have huge stocks of food grain. In fact, I think this year, a simple projection where it peaks, which is around June, July, it'll cross for the first time 100 million tons of rice and wheat stocks. At the same time, we've got children malnourished, we've got a lack of nutrition, poverty. I just can't get over the fact that we've got stocks of food grain and children dying just looking at that stocks. Those stocks are actually being eaten by rats and rodents, right? Can't something be done? It really is a shock to me that we have 100 million tons and poverty.
Let me first speak about the stock situation right away. On 1st of January, because there are quarterly norms, the buffer stock norm for rice and wheat that the country should have in the central pool is 21.4 million tons. That is what the optimal level of stocks should be in
That's
the
the
country.
buffer, yeah, right.
Yeah, buffer stock
I think I
norm.
worked on that when I was in the ministry, by the way. What is the optimal level? Yeah.
What is the actual stock today? 1st of January 2022, 86.9 million tons. It's more than four times the buffer stock norm we are having. The excess part of the stock, the economic value in terms of economic cost of that is 2.14 lakh crores. 2.14 lakh crores. That is the excess sitting without a purpose. If it was Tata's or anybody else, and if you want to mobilize resources, instead of selling off your, which I appreciate, the government took a bold step to sell off Air India finally. But the major reforms and the resources you can mobilize, this is a dead capital stock locked in for doing nothing. And as you said,
very well put.
Are eating.
Correct.
Now the question that you have is actually malnutrition. Now, malnutrition cannot be removed even if you give free food. Okay? Food is only one part, and wheat and rice certainly not.
Yes. It'll help. Quite right. It'll help, but would not solve it. Yeah.
In fact, we did a unit level analysis of 3 NFHS surveys. And what we found that the most powerful determinant of malnutrition in the country, or nutrition, is women education. Women education, if they are better off, then they can feed their children better, and they themselves have better earning capacity, if at all.
Very correct. No, but I agree with that. There are many aspects to malnutrition, absolutely. I've had a long discussions with Gawande on this. But, just to have a 4 or 5 rotis on a child's plate every day will help. I agree it won't solve it, but
it will help.
The figures you mentioned, I'm so glad that you mentioned those data points, 86 million tons when we need 21.
86.9.
The amount yes, shouldn't forget. Okay, moving on to the next thing, and I've read everything you've written over the last couple of years on minimum support price and the advantages of getting rid of it. But now I just want a little move beyond that. It's not going to get rid of. It's going to be there. So as
Sure.
we Sardar say, agge chalo. Chak de fatte. Okay. Now, if it's going to be there, and again, I must tell you, going back when I was in the finance ministry, we did use minimum support prices of sugarcane to encourage farmers to move to sugarcane, which was sugar was in a big shortage at that time. So if the MSP is here to stay, like it or not, can we use it to try and change our cropping pattern? In other words, make other crops relatively more profitable than wheat or rice, and so farmers switch to it and make it more stable. Just a thought.
Let me respond in two parts. One is that half of agriculture value, that is livestock and horticulture, which is 50% more nutritious for your malnutrition point of view, and is growing at triple the rate of wheat and rice rate of growth, right? And they don't have any MSP. Okay, so the market-driven economy is moving in that direction, which is high value, which is perishable, bigger challenge, but still growing at 3 times faster than the wheat and rice story, right? But still, if you want to say that MSP of other crops and procurement of other crops should be made, then you have to think how much you want to go ahead. Because if you have wheat and rice procurement open-ended and you are landing up with 4 times the buffer stock norms, massive lockup of stock, you are going to create another 4 FCIs, NAFEDs of this world with all these
No, you shouldn't overdo it. Tell me, which crops are we a bit short of? Are we short of pulses? Are we short of even vegetables, onions? We seem to keep importing onions.
Edible oils. Shortage because 60% of our edible oil consumption in the country is being imported. The issue is that what cost you are going to produce. You know, the palm oil is the cheapest oil in the world. It can produce 4 tons per hectare, whereas any other crop, you take mustard or groundnut or sesame or any other crop, will give you not more than 400, 600 kilograms per hectare. So the question is, if you raise the prices by, let's say, 50% more to get self-sufficiency, Atmanirbharta in edible oils, you will need tariff levels of 80%, 90%, 100%. Do you want to develop that type of Atmanirbharta at a tariff level of 80%, 90%? That's the issue of efficiency.
You know, I mean, I seriously feel, you have a point, but I seriously feel that if you make other crops, and maybe not only edible oil, but yes, a very good example, relatively more profitable than wheat or rice stocks will come down, production will come down, and where we're a bit short, that will go up.
I'm giving you the example of mustard. You know, our tariff levels are about 45% or so on mustard oil. And people are crying that the mustard prices, which used to be 100 rupees a kg last year, are 170 rupees a kg. So are you going to, efficiency, it's a very tight rope walk for the political masters, giving higher
political master,
prices
you
to
see, that brings me to my next point. It's you urban people. You want low food prices and you don't want farmers to make money. So how do you handle this contradiction that farmers want high food prices, urban areas, middle class, which are much more vocal politically, as you said, it's very tough. Urban middle class want low food prices. So farmers and the urban population, the middle class, are in contradiction there. How do you handle that?
No, this is a very good question, and I must say I have fought this battle for almost 30 years now on this question, that our policy is biased towards consumers and discriminates against farmers. Now, there are two ways. One is getting the markets right and allowing the prices to go up for the farmers and unhindered exports and no stocking controls and allow the futures and all that. That is the market economy framework. What you are saying is you start procuring more of other commodities. How much more and at what tariff levels you want to promote that self-sufficiency.
Right. How
That
much
is an
can you
issue.
afford? Yeah.
But the fact is,
true.
if you want to give wheat and rice at 2 rupees and 3 rupees kg to 67% of population, all your resources are literally gone there. This is the consumer bias in the system. Now, why you and me should get
Consumer
lower
bias,
prices for... So, if even the multi-dimensional poverty index of NITI lately has come up with 25% poverty in the country in 15-16 NFHS data that they have come. Why do we want to give free food literally to 67% of population? Can you not restrict it to just 30% of population and then allow the prices for others to go up? So you will have to
Right.
have
I get,
a balance.
yeah. Balance,
So-
yeah. Okay, so much politics, but you have really hit the nail on the head in giving numbers to how much excess stock we have, how much it's going to cost if you're going to raise MSP of other crops relative to white rice and wheat to bring their production down. You have put it in perspective, and that's all my training. At Delhi school, didn't I train you for that?
We learn together in Ashok Lahiri's room.
I want to take credit for everything. So, but thank you very, very much for joining us. That was very useful and very clear, as always.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Prannoy. Thank you for having me on your show.
Sure.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you very
Oh.
much. Welcome back. We have someone who I describe as perhaps globally the most well-respected economist, policy maker in India, Montek Singh Ahluwalia, and has been for a long time. And I say this, Montek, about you even when you're not in the room or when you're not on Zoom, as they say. And we also got an even more respected, what should we call you? Number cruncher, cephalogist Dorab. Montek, just wanted to quickly get your views on the economic survey and the budget and this, more importantly, the current state of the Indian economy, where we got two great uncertainties. Economics anyway is terribly uncertain. And now we also have a pandemic where we don't know whether there'll be a fourth wave, fifth wave. We don't know what kind of viruses may mutate. In that situation, what should a government do? It's a real difficult situation because growth is slowed down. What should be done?
Well, as you say, that is a difficult situation. And actually, that's a situation that most countries face right now. As far as we're concerned, I guess the economic survey brings out the latest assessment of where the economy is now at the moment. They've come up with the 9.2% recovery of GDP. It's a big growth, but it's a growth that follows a big drop. However, they feel that it will take it a little above what it was in 2019-20. So I think there are two issues here. One, is this a strong recovery? Two, what are we expecting for the future? And the second is actually more important.
Right.
Now, as far as the recovery is concerned, there are people who have said that maybe it'll be less than 9.2, partly because the 9.2 is based on the data that was available for the first half of the year. And then there's a lot of micro data for subsequent periods. There's some evidence that maybe it's been growing more slowly than might have been hoped. But whatever it is, even if it comes in as a little below 9%, that'll certainly be a strong recovery. So we've taken a year to pretty much get back to where we were in 2019-20. Now, the interesting thing about the economic survey, and I don't know if the budget will actually take the same view, sometimes the budget differs a little bit. The survey says that growth next year could be between 8 and 8.5% of GDP. Now, quite honestly, if we manage to do just about 9%, let's say this year, followed by 8.5% next year, that would have to be called a very good performance. The question really is the 8.5? I mean, the 8.5 is highly desirable, but is the 8.5 likely? Now, the only point I would make here is that, if you look at the current year, basically the first half of the current year, according to the NSSO, the economy grew at about 13.7% over the depressed level of the previous year. If for the year as a whole, they're now projecting 9.2, that means in the second half, they're actually projecting less than 5. It could be that the Omicron wave might slightly moderate that even further. So the real question is, if the economy in the second half of the year is on a less than 5% growth path, what's going to take it up to 8 and 8.5? We should make an effort. There's no question. The first question you have to ask is...
That's a good point, yeah.
Is that technically possible? You could argue that basically we've had 2 wasted years in the sense that the pandemic, we plummeted. In the first year after the plummet, we just went back to where we were. So if you like, the growth rate of 2 years or so has been lost. During this period, investment was taking, so the capacity to produce was being expanded. Now, what was the growth rate loss? If you look at the last 2 years before the pandemic, probably the average growth rate was around 5% or so, okay? So you could argue that we have, if you like, a 10% unexploited potential to exploit in the coming year, even though in the second half of this year, we're only at about 5%. But the question is, how are we going to utilize that potential? What are we going to do?
So
Now, if
I've
you
got
look
to
at-
interrupt you there.
Yeah.
Sorry, Montague, I just have to interrupt you with a specific question, and something that this government and your government seem to kind of fail on, and that was disinvestment. If you just have a look at the data on disinvestment in this year, according to the economic survey, and of course it'll come in the budget tomorrow, and if you look at disinvestment or privatization, I think your government that refused to call it privatization, that was the target, 1.75 lakh crores this year. And it's been way above what it's been for the last 3 years. And then the actual, we never met our target, except for the 1 year when it was about 30,000 was the target. But this time it was 92% below. Now, the same thing happened when you were working with the government. What is it that makes us fail on disinvestment? Is it a lack of belief that it will improve the economy? And isn't that I mean, we've had Air India, which is a great thing to have after 40 years, but don't we need that money to boost the economy right now?
Well, let me answer the first question, which is, what is it that holds back?
Yes.
I mean, I don't want to go back all the way to the UPA. That's a very long time ago. But I think it's probably true that during the
We'd
UPA,
love to hear that.
During the UPA, there wasn't a commitment to privatize. They still called it disinvestment, okay? The change which has
So there's a lack of belief in it.
Well, yeah, I think, maybe for whatever reason, the political composition of the UPA included many that actually didn't approve of privatization. That has certainly changed as far as declarations are concerned, because now the government says, look, we want to privatize everything except the very strategic sector. I think that's a good development. Why doesn't it happen? My feeling on that is that the bureaucrats that have to do it are extremely nervous about selling something at whatever might be called an inadequate price. So I think without even realizing it.
But Montague, as Dorab knows also, this year was a boom year for the stock market. So Dorab, how important is it for us to raise that money at a time? Yeah, go ahead.
Mr. Ahluwalia. It has succeeded once in the past. And why don't we ask ourselves what made that succeed? That was the minister, Arun Shourie. He just rammed it through. The question is today, it's Arun Shourie. And today you have a minister, we don't even know whose name is, the secretary who is. You want to get it done, you put a Nitin Gadkari there. You get somebody who gets things done, because this is not an easy job. You got to push, shout, push people out of the way. It's a difficult job because nobody wants to do it, but it has to be done. So you get a guy like Nitin Gadkari who gets it done.
There's no question that I think Arun, when he went into it with great belief and with fervor and transparency. Mind you, civil servants will not be too happy looking at what happened, because he did sell off these things, and then there were all these kind of questions raised about, whether he got the right price, etc. So the totality of that experience was not necessarily happy, and we need to address that. Of course, you're right that what you need to do is put in place a political leadership that will take responsibility and determine in advance what is actually a fair process, and then live with that process. Now, in that sense, I think the fact that Air India has happened is good. I mean, this has been going on for a long time.
But Montague, would you say that earlier on, privatization was a nice thing to have, but now it's an essential thing to have? You just don't have the money. You got to sell your assets and look after, in the K-shaped recovery, look after the poorer people. Otherwise, you're not going to, they have suffered the most, and you need that money. It's urgent.
I have no doubt
now. It's
about
urgent.
that. It is vastly more urgent, especially because all the hopes that successive governments displayed, that the tax ratio would somehow rise through this reform or the other reform, that hasn't happened. I mean, one of the great weaknesses in our situation, and this was true both in the previous government and in this one, that the tax ratio is at least 3 to 4 percentage points of GDP lower than what it should be on any comparative analysis. I mean, work has been done on this. So if you're not able to raise taxes, I completely agree. You need to put the whole privatization thing on a very high profile, give it full political backing, and just get it done. No question about that.
This year, the government has collected 67% more than its budgeted revenue. Budgeted for 9%, is collected 67%. And yet, the tax to GDP ratio is down. It's we need to collect a hell of a lot more.
Yes, I think lots of work has been done on this. And, it's not very useful comparing this year with last year or anything, because these were unusual years. The general
Sorry, I'm not comparing with last year. I'm comparing with their own estimate. In the last year's budget, it says revenue will grow by 9%. It has grown by 67%. That's a slight miscalculation, if I might say.
I mean, when the full budget numbers come out, we'll have to look at what it is. But you have a valid point there, that on the tax front this year, there is better performance than was expected. That's certainly true. But, in terms of tax to GDP ratio, is not all that good. I mean, it's probably about the same as it was 2 years ago.
That's the point.
And that is the point. Really, that is the point.
Montague, it's been great talking to you, and as usual, full of important points and put very clearly. And it's great to have you on your own, or would you prefer to have a fight with a whole lot of other panelists?
No. I'm very happy to be chatting to you and Dorab. Thanks very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much for being with us. We'll take a short break now. Thank you very much for being with us.
Bye-bye.
Welcome back. We've got Arvind Subramanian with us. Thank you very much, Arvind. You're going to be asked tough questions by Dorab. I'll make things easy for you. I've read your work analyzing the economy right now. You're working hard for once in your life. Actually, you did work quite hard when you produced the economic surveys, I must say. Yes, you did. But first thing is that we are going through a crisis. And I'll just give you some data, and then I'll ask you about your data about the pre-pandemic, how there was a slowdown. But first, just have a look at the current crisis, which some of our viewers might not have seen. We look at overall GDP in the economic survey. It shows that if you compare with 2019, we dropped by about 8%, and we've gone up by about 8.5 to 9%. So but it's because this 8.5 is on a lower base, we're still at 2019 level. And if you look at the normal growth at that time, it could have been 5-6%. So it would have been 12% higher than what it is. So losing 12% in 2 years in GDP growth is a serious crisis. And if we look at manufacturing, it's even worse, because that's really taken the brunt of it. If we look at manufacturing, it's worst affected. 2019, it dropped dramatically and has gone up by about 12.5. But manufacturing normally grows a little faster than overall GDP, because that includes agriculture. And so if we look at, compared to what it could have been or would have been under normal circumstances, there's about a 23-24% shortfall. Just stick with those two. Agriculture has been more or less fine, so we won't go into that. This is a crisis, and how do we get out of this, Arvind Subramanian?
Yeah, I think in some ways, first of all, to be fair, Prannoy, those kinds of numbers of, having lost 1 or 2 years is not going to be unique to India. Yeah. I mean, the pandemic is it heavy?
No, that's true. No, not unique at all. Yeah.
Yeah. But you could argue that in some ways India has been maybe a little bit more affected than elsewhere. But I think what you showed acquires extra salience, because even leading up to the pandemic, the economy was weak. So you see, so that's the magnitude of the challenge that the government and India
We
faces.
have your graphic. So Arvind, we have your graphic on that. So if you can just run us through it. It's the pre-pandemic slowdown. You compared 2002 to 2011, and then 2011 to 2020. And there was, you've shown a tremendously weakening in almost every sector. If we just have a look at all of them, it is quite shocking. Why don't you run us through this?
So essentially, as you know, between 2000, the early 2000s, India experienced an unprecedented boom. Across the board, if you take investment, consumption, exports, imports, taxes, asset growth, everything kind of boomed. And the red bars are showing here that they grew in real terms by 10-15% every year. But then what happened after the global financial crisis was, you see, every indicator has slowed down, not by a small amount, but very, very sharply. Take exports in that thing, for example. It went from something like 15% real every year to 4.5% every year. So massive thing. So that's the context in which I think we should think about how the economy will come back. Because
that is the worrying part. That is the worrying part. There was already a slowdown. So given the crisis now, what do we learn from that slowdown, and how do we get out of this?
Yeah, I think, the slowdown has had one big scar, which adds to the problem, which I think is worth highlighting before we talk about the solutions, which is that if you look at Manrega demand, for example, right, it is even today about, 35, 40, 50% more than pre-pandemic levels. So that has, in a sense, left a deep scar in terms of the jobs crisis. We know that job growth was weak even before, but now you've had a massive hit. And therefore, that's why all the indicators of consumption, employment, etc., reflect a very weak labor market and weak incomes for the poorest. So that's what the COVID has done. So now what should we do going forward? That's the big question. And I think that's the question I think the government and the budget will try and tackle. But I think that before we do that, we must acknowledge 2 or 3, good pieces of news. As we've shown, the government has made big advancements in building physical and digital hardware. I think the delivery of essential goods.
I think you've shown graphs of road building has gone up, railways not as much, but has gone up as well.
Exactly. The digital infrastructure, the UPI, the amount of cash benefits we're doing, that's also improved. And of course, one of the signature achievements of the Modi government, which is, delivering, chula, cooking, cooking gas, toilets, bank accounts, housing, etc. What we call new welfareism. I think that's cushioned people for the future. Yeah, the new welfare. And then, of course, in the very recent period, we've had exports which are doing. I think we should acknowledge that. And I think there are 1 or 2 reforms like you've just been discussing, the privatization of Air India, whatever people might say is kind of really a big signature achievement. We tried to do this for a long time. So I think we should acknowledge that. So the question is, what next?
Right.
Now,
may I ask you a question, please?
Yeah, sure. Please.
Is it about time that the idea you floated 2 or 3 years ago of universal basic income, is this the time when there are 85% of people have dropped their income, when 4.5 crore people have moved into extreme poverty? Is that a time to think about UBI? At least for some people, if not total UBI, part UBI.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that what the pandemic and all that's happened, it shows the need for a real safety net for a vast majority of the people. Remember, in bits and pieces in the last 5-10 years, we have created this social safety net. But the problem is that, not everyone benefits. And also, you want them to want people to be protected against shocks like the pandemic. Right. So it would be a very good time for something like a universal basic income. Now, but here's
one of the things. Sorry, Arvind. Go ahead.
No, see, I think that this is, I think, a very important point when we look ahead. Is Prannoy, I think there is a historic opportunity for India today. Historic, and let me tell you what this opportunity is. After the global financial crisis, China became very uncompetitive, especially on a lot of its exports, labor-intensive exports. We calculate, Soumitra Chatterjee and I, about $150 billion of exports it became uncompetitive in. But we didn't take advantage of that. Vietnam, Bangladesh, Laos, Cambodia, Indonesia.
Right.
Now there's a second. Now is the second opportunity, Prannoy and Dorabra. What is that second opportunity?
Yes, you're right.
See, no, the second opportunity is that investors are fleeing China for geopolitical reasons. And what we've discovered is that even places like Vietnam, because of the zero COVID policy and things, are not able to meet the space vacated by China. And Vietnam is just not big enough. So there is a second historic opportunity.
An opportunity. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And I wanted to go into one more thing. It's a big dilemma, which India. No, just one second, Dura. Sure. There's a very crucial thing that's coming up in the budget. The big dilemma, and it's happening around the world, and it's to do with what should the government do. We've got, should it boost the economy? Should it worry about budget deficits? If you have rising prices now, but you need to boost growth. Inflation currently over the last 6 months is averaging 12% WPI. That's terrible and is politically damaging. Versus you've got this problem of a stagnating economy where you already got a budget deficit that's very high. If you try and push and boost the economy, inflation will go up. We've seen this same problem around the world, including America. How do you foresee this big dilemma? How should the government handle this big dilemma?
Yeah, you see, Prannoy, my view is very much that, budgets and, spending a bit here, there, a little bit more, a little bit less, is not going to alter fundamentally your growth trajectory, right? That's going to depend on getting exports and private investment going. Government spending can help in the short run. Of course, it can build infrastructure, which can boost long-run growth. And I think that's something that I think the budget should, provide some, a space and spending money for. But more broadly, budgets don't boost growth. I mean, it's all the accompanying policies. And I want to come to, seizing that historic opportunity in a second. So I think the budget should
you had a question?
No, just let me finish.
Finish and then.
Yeah, I think the budget should very much kind of say, look, firstly, I think it should continue what it did very well last time to come clean on the numbers, all this off balance sheet. It was very good. Continue that.
Right.
Point number one. Point number two is that if there is a bit of a boom, given that our budget deficits and debts are very high, I think it should plan for some, steady consolidation of the debt and deficit going down to signal that, not some drastic thing, but to signal that it's, government believes in prudence, it's taking inflation very seriously, and therefore, kind of signal responsibility on, deficits, debt and inflation. Nothing that you do in the budget is going to make things crazy one way or the other, but just to signal that responsibility, which I think broadly the government has a good record, decent record on being responsible, as it showed even during the crisis. So I think broadly that's what it needs to do. It needs to say, broadly we'll provide some money for capital expenditure that needs to be done. We're going to be responsible. And if there's any lingering, problems from the labor market, we will give you the social safety net expenditures will be preserved enough for that. That's, I think, those are the kind of modest, but, useful goals that the budget should set for itself. Sorry, now you had questions, Dora.
Yeah.
Dora,
4 years ago, Arvind Panagria, your namesake, wrote an article in the Economic Times where he said that India's largest company, Reliance Industries, for net investment of $2.2 million, created 5 jobs. Another company called Shahi Exports, which is our country's largest exporter, created for the same amount 1,260 jobs, which is 250 times as many jobs as Reliance Industries for the same amount of investment. Should the budget in some way, because you were talking about people fleeing China and going to Bangladesh and Vietnam, is one of the reasons they're not coming here is the fact that we are not investing in those things, our labor laws, etc., holding people back. I mean, isn't that what will create employment among the semi-skilled workers? We don't have that many skilled workers. It's the semi-skilled and unskilled workers who need employment.
Yeah, so I think that going forward, we need to revive growth and labor-intensive growth. I think we're all agreed on that. We've done very poorly in the past on that. Now, how do we do that? Even if you take, I think, the PLI scheme, for example, most of the incentives are for tech-intensive, capital-intensive, skill-intensive industries. I mean, the labor-intensive industries are not getting very much. But I think what we need to do fundamentally is re-evaluate Atmanirbharta. That, I think, so 2 things. Create an investment climate where investors are going to feel secure that there's a level playing field, there's confidence, there's trust, that once you come in, regulations don't change, some people are not favored more than others. That, fundamental trust in investors, I think, because in the last 5 years, a lot has happened that makes investors, I think. That's why if you look at private investment, for example, it's been completely flat for many, many years. 1. Second, I think the government needs to reevaluate the Atmanirbharta policy completely. If you want to export garments, you need the cheapest cost imports. You can't raise tariffs for imports and expect this to be part of this. Second, if you want to export to the dynamic markets, you can't stay away from these trade agreements because you're at a disadvantage relative to something else. Finally, you can't be protectionist. Right. You can't keep raising tariffs, become inefficient. You see, what I think Indians think and the Indian government thinks is that we have a big market and, people will come to India for the market. But as we calculated, the Indian consumption market is actually very small compared to the global market. So we have to be internationally competitive, which means cheapest inputs, open economy.
Major rethink.
Yeah, right. Major rethink.
So just, we've got 30 seconds more. Arvind, if you could just tell us, what is the world we are entering into now for the next year? We've seen America is going to raise their interest rates. We're seeing a tightening of money supply all over. Everybody's getting a bit worried about inflation. So are we entering a very difficult phase globally?
Well, I think, as you know, Prannoy, there's a big controversy about whether this inflation is going to be temporary or permanent and whether, the Federal Reserve action can bring it down or not. I think, because, for example, at the moment, if you look at the latest US GDP numbers, I mean, it's like growing gangbusters. I mean, it's one of the,
record.
Yeah. So I think for the coming years, I think that will slow down. And people expect, I think, also inflation to come down as a result of that. So I think there will be a little bit of, impact on developing countries like India because interest rates will come down. Maybe some capital will flow out of India. But I don't expect major ructions and turmoil in the year ahead because generally, in advanced economies, yes, there is an inflation threat, right, but generally they've coped well with it.
Okay. Unfortunately, we run completely out of time, almost 10 o'clock here. Thank you very much. Dorab, I know you had about 1,000 other questions, but, we'll save that till
next
tomorrow.
year.
Thank you. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Dorab. Thanks, Prannoy. Always great to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Lovely to see you.